how big a role would you say your Scottish identity plays in your songwriting and your music?
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone that writes songs or music, their identity, whatever it is going to play a massive big role, almost kind of subconsciously. And that's certainly the case with us, both musically and lyrically. We come, not just a Scottish identity, but the particular part of Scotland that we're from, which is the West Highlands. There's a lot in our words that are the words that I write in the songs that are inspired by coming from a small place and you know, currently living in Glasgow in a big place, and there's all the different people that come from those places that you've met along the way and stuff. And I think that's fairly universal for, you know, it can be the same for lots of songwriters all over the world. You know, I think that's well worth pointing out that, you know, identity is an important part for really anyone that's writing songs.
And it's interesting too what you're saying about being from a small place, because then from that, you know, you go up and down the country and you go abroad and you play these shows.
Yeah.
How does that impact your perspective when you're taking these topics that feel tied to these small places but bringing them all over the world and they're still resonating with people? Does it change your view on where you come from at all?
Yeah, well, it just makes me realise how kind of similar and interconnected the world is, and so many people. I mean, we've travelled mainly through in Europe, so I'm not really, you know, I'm not going to stand and pretend I'm the most well-travelled person in the world, but throughout Europe, certainly what I've noticed is that a lot of the themes that I think are really particular to where we're from and what we're talking about on a local level are actually relatable to people, you know, in Switzerland, Spain, Germany, all those places, and they go, you know, they can find something in it that relates to them and how they were brought up or where they were brought up. So I think that's mainly what it showed me, that yeah, there's just a great togetherness and similarity with people, specifically probably in rural communities actually throughout the world.
I mean, at what point when you're working on that, I mean, take like the last record, for example, at what point would you pick out those through lines and those themes that feel like they're connecting the album together, but also are going to be the kind of main touch points that are going to resonate with people around the world? Yeah,
I think that the last album was probably more, well, not subtle, but probably not quite as obvious as, like, the first album was very, very clearly, I kind of wrote it over the kind of 4 years that I was, or just towards the end of the 4 years I was at uni, and I'd kind of like felt that my character had really changed. At 17 I'd moved down to Glasgow from the Highlands and been not homesick, but just sort of like, what is this, you know, a totally new existence for me, and I'd sort of developed over the 4 years as someone that got used to Glasgow. And there's so many aspects of Glasgow that I love, which is why I've been living here for 10 years now, and there's so many aspects of it that I really want to get away from, and I miss the Highlands basically. So the first album was really clearly about that, and there's like lines in it that are really obvious, where the second album I think was a lot more kind of subconscious, and it was basically just, it was almost like a storytelling album, and there's wee stories in the middle of the songs, but actually after I put it all together I realised they're all really still linked by the same thing, which is basically, as you started this conversation with, which is basically where I'm from and how that's affected me.
I mean, another one of the things I want to touch upon, kind of what we're talking about there in regards to the last album, is you have one of the songs in Gaelic.
Yeah.
How would you compare the musicality of Gaelic to English, those two languages?
Yeah, I suppose a lot of it depends on what kind of genre we talk about in terms of English, but Gaelic, certainly traditional Gaelic music, for me, and I've always said this, the main appeal of it is just the sheer simplicity of its melodies. You know, like, that's not being negative in any way. I mean the kind of genius that's in the simplicity. And I think for me, no matter what type of music I'm listening to, and amongst the four of us, we'd listen to a fairly broad variety of genres. And I think for me, the thing that runs through them all is just melody, and something that's relatable in a musical sense, and simple, and doesn't feel like it's been contrived and put together, and somebody's not sat down and gone, right, here's two notes, let's see if we can do something weird and wonderful and move it with this. It can be weird and wonderful, but if it is, it's naturally so, and that's where I think Gaelic music is something that for me is a great sort of like a musical compass, if you get in terms of relating to other styles.
Could you ever take, you know, where, say you're singing in Gaelic and it takes you down these different melodic paths, could you ever then bring that back into your songwriting when you're then writing again in English?
Yeah, I probably do, but not necessarily consciously. I mean, when I'm writing a song, I don't really do anything consciously, but I think looking, not that I do kind of reflect on songs that I've written, But if I were to, I think I would probably find that there's a definite Gaelic melodic influence in certainly some of it.
Another one of the kind of touch points of your songwriting that has always stood out to me is the fact that so much of it feels very uplifting, you know, and it's galvanizing, it gets people on their feet, and it has this positive side to it. From a songwriting point of view, a lot of your stuff is also very narrative based. Mm-hmm. Are you consciously ever searching for the kind of positive linings to a story? And is that what you're trying to get to when you're writing towards something?
I don't know. As I say, I don't really, on the odd occasion that I do sit down to write a song specifically about something, it's never particularly successful, and when I do write a song that I'm happy with and the boys like, and we decide to release it, it's generally more something that's happened quite sort of subconsciously, and I've just sat down with a melody in my head and written. And as you say, it tends to be a narrative, and I don't really know why that is, but possibly because I'm not a very good songwriter and it's a lot easier just to write a story. But I think I'm always trying to get a positive message across. I think our fans and our gigs in general, I think the Tideline's show is hopefully quite a positive thing. And so I try to almost slightly consciously relate the kind of tailor the songs to that. And actually that became pretty, convenience probably not the word, but pretty relevant at the start of lockdown, where people were really, really looking for positivity at a time where there was so much negativity, as you know, people were worried about health, you know, their families, but also just the future in terms of their jobs, their lives. They were all locked indoors. And at that point we had this album ready to release, and we thought, well, what do we do? Do we hold it back? Do we release it once this is all over? And actually it was when we looked at the material and realised that there is a positive message throughout it, we thought in some ways there couldn't be a better time to release this, because people kind of need this now. I'm not saying they needed our album, but they needed that message from, and they were looking to musicians, because in many ways musicians were some of the few people that were actually still operating, because we were going on social media and talking to our fans and trying to keep some level of connection with people. And so actually, I think by complete chance and luck on our part, rather than anything particularly talented or skillful, I think the positive message that's in the album, and lines like "Shadow to the Light," I know I've said it 1,000 times, but no matter what lies ahead of us now, we will be okay. You know, that was written long before coronavirus had ever been heard of, and it just became, as we went into that lockdown, released that song, and people were kind of, I think it probably got a lot more engagement than it otherwise would have.
I think it kind of speaks to the universal nature of the music too, like what we started off this conversation saying about how it can resonate with people all over the world.
Yeah.
If you write about something that's specific in the moment, it's always going to end up leaning into these things that are more kind of timeless and can be applied to any point in history.
Yeah, and I think that's the case with probably all songs. There's one narrative in particular that's in the album that's kind of jumped into my head just as you were talking about that, is one verse of a song called "Taste the Rain," and it's literally about a club that used to be open in Sohill Street just around the corner that I used to frequent on a Saturday night, and there was always a girl selling roses outside the club, and at 3 o'clock in the morning you'd just get all those people going round, and this girl was going round selling roses, and I always thought at the time that's quite a kind of poetic, there's just something funny about this, and people have all got their, you know, at that time of the morning, without wanting to go into too much detail, people have all got their own sort of agendas and what's happening, who they're talking to and what they're trying, and you know, and that ended up in a song which was a very, very particular memory of mine, or not a particular memory, but a very particular image of mine that I'd seen over a number of years in a very specific place. But I mean, there's people that have come up to me and said, "Oh, I love that lyric because it just reminds me of 40 years ago when I was, you know, in a completely different setting in a different world." And so I think that's something that's really great about songwriting, and it's a really lovely feeling about when you put a song out like that and it means something specific to you, and then it turns out it means something completely different, or sometimes something quite similar to loads of different people.
We mentioned as well kind of there that this last album came out at the start of lockdown. It came out kind of in the height of COVID. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we're speaking ahead of your Touch show. This is the first show back ahead of a wee kind of run of Scottish dates. Yeah. Has rehearsing for this tour and playing these songs in that setting so far taught you anything about them that you didn't know previously?
Being totally honest, not so much in terms of rehearsal, but I'm convinced that if you ask me that question in 3 weeks after playing to live audiences, seeing how people react to them, the answer will 100% be yes. And I've always found that that obviously feedback in any walk of life is always helpful, but in terms of songwriting, just hearing people singing the lyrics and kind of judging what parts they're singing in a passionate way, or what parts they're maybe not singing, or and you can realise what relates to them. And then of course talking to people kind of anecdotally after the gigs, you hear, oh, you know, this line really means something to me because of this, and that's kind of what really, I just get a great feeling out of that, really.
That seems like a really nice positive note to wrap it up on, man. Thanks very much.
Cool. No, thank you. Thanks for chatting to me. Cheers.